Hello everyone, and welcome to a short history of CGI, computer generated imagery, our last class before taking our third test. And we have talked about some of the big franchise films, the Marvel movies, and maybe Harry Potter and Fast and Furious and that sort of thing. And instead of covering them all in detail, what they all have in common is a increased use of CGI. It really seems to be the dominant technology for our big budget movies these days. There's plenty of small budget movies that win lots of awards, like Parasite and The Green Book and movies like that. And those are the ones that walk away with the Oscars every year for the most part. But the movies that walk away with barrelfuls of and boatloads of money are the big budget CGI heavy movies. In the past, some of the big movies would be historical epics like Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago and things like that, even Gone with the Wind. But these days, the big budget movies are all CGI movies, and I thought that we should talk about that. We've talked about independent movies and Quentin Tarantino and the Coen brothers and all of that, but CGI heavy movies are really the thing that's driving the business. So let's do a short history. We're going to start off before, actually pre-CGI, with King Kong. And King Kong used stop motion animation. Stop motion animation is still around. It's very popular, but it's not for the big monsters. It's not for big giant Kongs and dinosaurs and things like that. After CGI came in the early 90s, and we'll get up to that when we get up to Jurassic Park and so on, stop motion animation more or less went the way of animated type films, Pixar type films, and movies like that. And so instead of the big monsters and interacting with live action actors, there's very little of that. So it's not interacting with real people and green screen and all that kind of stuff. For the most part, the entire movie's made on tabletops, and they are wonderful movies. Let's take a quick look before we talk a little bit more about King Kong. And here are some recent stop motion films. Tim Burton, we've talked about him, and he's got a couple, Nightmare Before Christmas and Frankenweenie and so on. Wes Anderson has a couple, and there are some others that are just fantastic. And as we can see here, they're tiny little figures in the camera, and the cameras can do moves and all that kind of stuff. And they are animated inch by inch, fraction of an inch by fraction of an inch. So they're still pretty popular, just not the big monster type movies. So back to King Kong. Luckily, I found the entire documentary that I would be showing in class, and it's the one that I have on the DVD of the King Kong film. The Peter Jackson, he produced the documentary. So what happened was Peter Jackson decided he wanted to do a remake of King Kong, a very faithful remake. Takes place in the 1930s and all that. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit longer, but basically it is a remake of the original 1933 film. And he wanted to sort of promote his own movie and helped the re-release of the original King Kong film from 1933 and produced a nice big documentary on how they made the original King Kong film. Okay, so in the documentary there's Peter Jackson and most of his animators and people like that, and in order to kind of co-promote their own movie, and it's really a love. King Kong was the movie that Peter Jackson wanted to do before Lord of the Rings. That was really his big film that he wanted to tackle. So they did this wonderful documentary. They interviewed people. They found the original armature for Kong, and they were unable to use it. And I can understand why. It's a historical thing. It's in a private collection. So they built their own and did some experimenting in stop motion. Peter Jackson's movie, of course, is all CGI, but they did a couple of scenes with stop motion, and so we get to see the documentary on how they did that. And like I said, the documentary is like an hour and a half, something like that. And of course, you don't have to watch the entire thing, but if you're really into it, it's a great documentary. But I usually would show about 5 or 6 minutes in class, and I've got it marked out at about an hour and 3 minutes to an hour and 9 minutes. And that's where they talk specifically about stop motion, and you can see how they did that. And otherwise, if you're really into it, it is a great documentary, and it's the one that came on the DVD for the re-release of the 1933 King Kong. You can see they would have to tighten stuff down. This is called the armature, and it has to be posable. So when they raise Kong's arm, it has to hold its position, and so they might have to tighten stuff down. And they are going to move it just a fraction of an inch, right? If Kong's going to growl, you're going to move it down just a little bit like that, and then they're going to click off a frame of film and a little bit more, and then click off a frame of film. It's all frame by frame. Anyway, you'll see all that in the documentary, and it's really good, and I'm amazed that the whole thing's right up there on YouTube. So that's so cool. And like I said, these days, mostly we're getting I don't want to call them children's movies. Maybe we'll call them family movies. And lots of directors, like I say, Wes Anderson, Tim Burton, lots of other directors like to work in stop motion. Okay, so that is the effect from somewhere in the 1920s, because they didn't invent it for King Kong, but somewhere in the 1920s all the way up to the 1990s. And Steven Spielberg was all set to do stop motion for his dinosaurs for Jurassic Park until the people at Industrial Light and Magic came to him and said, look what we've got here, what do you think? And so Spielberg changed course during pre-production, and they went with the CGI, the spectacular CGI. So we'll talk about Jurassic Park, but after that, now without the big dinosaurs and monsters and stuff, we get these family type movies. Okay, also a little pre-CGI, the very best sci-fi film of all time is Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. It's still on all the lists of the best sci-fi films, the top 10, all that kind of stuff. And the reason I put this in here is to make the point that CGI, it's wonderful and it's pretty to look at, and Stanley Kubrick would have used CGI, but it doesn't necessarily make a movie better. You still need a good story. And 2001 has a way out there story. It's an excellent story, and it's so well done. It holds up quite well. We looked at some of it in class, even though it's 50 years old. It still looks fantastic. So I wanted to throw that in there, that there are pre-CGI movies that are fantastic. They're well worth seeing. Blade Runner would be another one. There's no CGI in Blade Runner. There's flying cars. There's all that stuff, and it's all miniatures and models and things like that. So let's don't get too snooty about, well, the effects aren't as good as movies today. And I also want to caution everybody that yes, the effects aren't as good as movies of today, and movies of today effects aren't going to be nearly as good as they're going to be in 50 years. So we are not by any means at the peak of technology or anything like that. And when you are in your 40s and 50s and you look back on the movies that you saw in the 2020s, you're going to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I saw those flat screen movies, and they're not holograms, and they don't do this and they don't do that. And technology is always changing. We don't want to look back on the past and discard it. It can be appreciated. Charlie Chaplin's black and white silent stuff is brilliant, right? So we don't want to discard anything from the history. We can appreciate where we are today and still love the old stuff. All right, so let's dive in to actual CGI. And here from 1972 we have the hand. And that's pretty much it. It's just this hand, and it turns, and makes a fist and so on. Now, in class, I would talk about the hand, and then I'd show some of it for 30 seconds, and then I'd come back to the slides, and we'd go back to the next effect. And so if you want to do that, that's probably the best way to go, or maybe go through 2 or 3 slides and then switch over and watch the links to the YouTube clips. When I do this lecture in class, it's almost all off YouTube clips. I don't have to bring too many of my own DVDs in. There's a few that I bring in, but I don't have to bring too many in there. Luckily, most of this stuff is up on the internet and on YouTube. And there are a lot of links, but they're all pretty short, right? You're watching maybe a minute and then back and forth like that. So I don't have to say a whole lot other than just to say, here's the effect, go check it out, and here's the next effect, and so on. So back to 1972, that might be a little early. Remember, Jurassic Park was 20 years later. So CGI took a good 20 years before it was really ready for the big time. And I would say Jurassic Park and then maybe Toy Story and so on was the big time, feature films and all that. Next up, we jump 10 years, and a fantastic year for sci-fi. A lot of serious people, critics and so on, and sci-fi fans note that Blade Runner, E.T., Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, The Thing, all came out that same year. That's a pretty good list of movies. And Tron. So this is a transitional year. Most of these movies are models. Blade Runner and E.T., big budget, fantastic movie, and Star Trek, big budget, fantastic movies. They're still doing models. At the same time, Tron comes out, and they are doing a digital environment. The actors are all humans. Okay, the actors are all humans, and they shot them on a black background, not green or blue, but on a black background. The black wouldn't register, and then they could layer it on top and put them walking around in these sort of glowing outfits. And the outfits they wear are kind of cool. They kind of glow. That was a whole different effect. They only used it for this one movie, but they actually took all of the 35 millimeter frames of the film where the actors were. They enlarged them to, I don't know, 10 by 17 or something like that, and lit them from underneath so that parts of their outfits would glow, and then photographed it a second time. Very time-consuming process. Okay, very time-consuming process, but that's why their outfits glow. And if you want to get into more of the making of Tron, you could probably find that stuff online as well. But this is the first digital environment, and they were pretty smart. You're going to see that a lot of the people, as they go along, the Pixar people and so on, they are smart and know that this is in no way realistic. And the term photoreal is the term that people use, photoreal, for as realistic as we can get. Instead of in real life, they would call it photoreal. Sometimes they call it digital backstage, something like that. And so this is set in a computer. It's set in cyberspace. And so the fact that it looks kind of weird and kind of odd and so on, that's fine. They sort of accounted for that. They didn't have this stuff on interacting with people on planet Earth. They have humans and these light cycles and things like that. And as long as we understand that they're in a computer, then it works out just fine. Next up, 1985, young Sherlock Holmes, and this is the first complete CGI actor, not light cycle or background. And Tron has all these weird geometric things and that sort of thing. And that's what CGI can do at that time. That sort of gunmetal gray, that blue-gray sort of a look. They can do backgrounds and things like that. And the humans can do all the human stuff, and everything else is sort of this cubes and spheres and that sort of thing. So now here we have an actor. Now it's supposed to be a stained glass window, and a priest gets a poisonous dart in his neck, and he is hallucinating, and he sees a stained glass window jump out of the stained glass and come after him. And it is on screen for an astounding maybe 40 seconds. So not very long. There's also a quick little scene in Willow. I didn't want to do Willow as well, but Spielberg and Industrial Light and Magic and so on, they were really pushing that. But that's 1985. Again, it's a stained glass window. Doesn't have to be very realistic, just like the cyberspace. And another one that's kind of fun, it didn't really break any boundaries or anything, but it's a wonderful music video that Dire Straits made for Money for Nothing. And I've linked to it. That's when MTV was really getting a foothold, and people were putting lots and lots of money into music videos, Michael Jackson's music videos, Peter Gabriel's amazing music videos. And so here is a CGI music video, and it's a lot of fun. You'll probably recognize the song when you hear it. And it's about a couple of just workmen unloading trucks at what in 1985 would have been like Best Buy. Just refrigerators, microwave ovens, big screen color TVs, all that kind of stuff. And they're just kind of grumbling. It's very funny. Mark Knopfler was just overhearing these guys talking. I should have learned to play the guitar and be on the MTV and look at all the hot women. And we got to unload these microwave ovens and big screen color TV. So that's what it's all about. That's these workmen there. And it's pretty funny. And in no way is it any way realistic. It's very cubist, you might say. But that's what they were doing. Music videos, again, a pretty good use for CGI in the 1980s. And a few years later, James Cameron comes up with the next step, and that is this morphing. And it's sort of like liquid metal, like mercury. And he did it in The Abyss. And the Abyss, it's a real mishmash of a movie, because there's aliens and sci-fi, and then there's nuclear thriller stuff. There's an underwater sea lab, and there are scientists who accidentally stumble onto some aliens. But then there are the bad guys who want to take the nuclear weapons and all that. So it's kind of a nuclear thriller, and then it's kind of sci-fi, and it's not enough of this and it's not enough of that. And so it was a rather big flop at the box office. A big flop at the box office. And that is another theme that I want to touch on. Tron was too. Tron was a spectacular failure. Yes, it came from Disney and all that, but it lost a ton of money. It was very expensive to do, and so was The Abyss. So we're going to note I'll have a slide with all of the big misses. But every time a movie misses, they are still developing some new technology. So the technicians and the engineers, and they're all saying, well, that was really cool. And yeah, I know it didn't make any money at the box office, but I can take those tools and work with that and go forward. And that's what James Cameron did with the movie he made after The Abyss, a notable hit, Terminator 2. And that's where we get the T-1000 and sort of liquid metal and all of that. So yeah, he took the morphing part, the best part of The Abyss, and really concentrated on that on Terminator 2. And you get a chance to see that too. A nice link to that. Now, up to a few years after that, Jurassic Park, instead of Terminators and instead of cyberspace and music videos, we have an actual animal. Okay, yes, it's a dinosaur. It's like a big, well, I guess now we know they're descended from birds, but they look kind of like elephants, I guess, in part, elephants or reptiles of some sort. So the fact that they can do dinosaurs on Earth, that means they could do lots of other things. Now they can't at this point do lions and tigers because fur is beyond the technology at this point. But if you can do a dinosaur, you could do an elephant, you could do an alligator, you could do turtles, and all that stuff that just doesn't have fur and so on. And the scene that I have linked to is this one right here. And it is a wonderful scene. And I love the way Spielberg does this kind of slow reveal. And what you're going to see is the anthropologists are going to be taken to this island somewhere in the Caribbean, although of course it was filmed in Hawaii. And Spielberg is going to withhold. He's going to delay gratification. The Jeep's going to drive up, and Sam Neill's character clearly is going to see the dinosaurs. And we've been told this is a movie about dinosaurs, and we're going to be astounded. But Spielberg's not going to cut to the dinosaurs. Sam Neill's character is going to stand up in the Jeep. He's going to take off his sunglasses. He's going to take off his hat. We still don't cut to the dinosaurs. His eyes are bugging out. The camera's going to pan over to Laura Dern. She's looking at a leaf of some sort. She's marveling over this leaf. And Sam Neill's character is going to take her head and sort of turn it so that she can see the dinosaurs. And she's going to stand up. She's going to take her sunglasses off. Her jaw is going to drop open. And then finally, we're going to cut to the dinosaurs. And it doesn't take that long, but it's really nice filmmaking on Spielberg's part. It's really nice filmmaking. Just wait for it. Wait. Hold on. Here they come. And it's a wonderful way to build anticipation. It's really, really nice. But in the middle of all that, we're going to keep cutting back to faces, human faces. And this is the most important shot in any scene. And until the technicians can do a photoreal human face, they're not quite there yet. That is the hardest thing to do because we know exactly what they're supposed to look like. We don't know exactly what dinosaurs look like, or tigers, or lions, or space aliens, but we know what human faces should look like. We would know what human eyes and irises and pupils and all that. We're very, very critical of our own kind. And until technicians and engineers can do a believable human face, we're still going to be waiting for it. And we're pretty darn close, if not already there. But that is the peak of the mountain, right? That's the top of Mount Everest, is the believable human face. So in this wonderful scene with all these dinosaurs that we're going to see from a distance and up close and all that, Spielberg's going to keep cutting to our actors, and all the joy and all the emotion and all the fear and all of that is going to be in their faces. The CGI can't really do that yet. Okay, it really can't do that. And everything is going to be in the human face. And if we think about that a little bit, we are primed. It's probably in our DNA to respond to human faces when we are newborns. When we are newborns, or if we have a newborn, that little newborn is going to be 5 or 6 inches away from mommy and daddy and the nurse's face. Newborns can't focus very far at all. They can't see across the room. They can only focus maybe a foot or so away. And when we're cradling a newborn and we're looking at them, that's the first thing they see, is a face, a big human face. And they need to, at some point, not on the first day, but at some point they need to start, or we need to start smiling and gurgling and all that, right? Because we need to be fed. And if we don't have a positive interaction with our parents, then we don't get fed. So we are primed from the day of our birth to react to human faces. It's that important. It's that important. So Spielberg is going to keep cutting to actual human faces in this scene, and most of the good directors are going to for a while, until just pretty recently we're pretty darn close to really good human faces. But let's carry on. Speaking of good human faces, let's take a 180 and look at kind of awful, kind of scary human faces. Okay, yeah, Toy Story. And maybe you don't remember Toy Story when it first came out. Maybe you watched it on VHS or on DVD when you were little, and maybe you haven't seen it for a while, but the faces of This is Sid. This isn't Andy. This is Sid. And Andy's pretty creepy too. And the people at Pixar, they knew that. And they pretty much cut all the kids out of the movie. The kids are in Toy Story about as long as the shark and the alien were in Jaws and Alien. Not very much at all. Mostly we see feet and hands and not much else. And if you look at the trailer for Toy Story, there's no people at all, right? Like I say, feet, running, hands, and that sort of thing. And then we see Woody and Buzz and everybody else, and they are the key to the film. And that is very smart because they're toys, right? They look fine. They look like plastic toys. They don't have to look real. Now, Andy and Sid, they're supposed to look a little bit better than that, okay? And they look kind of scary, frankly. They look like weird alien things. But the toys are fine. They hardly had to change the toys over the years. After all these years, from '95 till Toy Story 4. But let's look at a little bit of the evolution of Andy, because that's really going to tell you how far they have traveled. So there's Andy in Toy Story 1. Here's Andy in Toy Story 3. Now he's bigger, of course. I think he's ready to go off to college, maybe, something like that, in Toy Story 3. And when they did a flashback to Andy remembering his early days with Woody, they sort of redid Andy. They sort of they did a reboot of Andy, and so in a flashback scene from Toy Story 3, Andy looks like this. He doesn't look like that from the first film. Okay, so yeah, the Pixar people, they knew that that Andy was not very workable and kind of scary. Now, mostly the animators have learned that you want to stay away from photoreal unless you can nail it. Okay, so after Toy Story, the Pixar people made their humans much more cartoony. And if you think of The Incredibles, if you think of Ratatouille, if you think of Up, they're very cartoony humans. With Andy, they tried to make him pretty realistic, all the right dimensions and all that, and it's really kind of weird and kind of scary. But if you think of Up and you think of those other films, right, Ratatouille and Incredibles, they're not very human at all. They're very cartoony, and that was a very smart move, a very smart move. Okay, a couple of years forward, we're getting pretty close to some really exciting stuff here. And by the way, Toy Story was the very first animated film, okay? The very first animated CGI cartoon there, and that was Toy Story. So that's where it comes in the pantheon of history, right? It's a first. There were shorter films. There were short films before that. It's the first feature length. So 1999, The Matrix comes out, and we have this term bullet time, where Neo is dodging bullets while he's in the Matrix. He's taken the red pill, and he's in the Matrix, and he's seeing the real world for what it is. And it was really amazing for a lot of people. This is the movie that came out at the same year that George Lucas relaunched his Star Wars franchise. Okay, we had the first 3 Star Wars movies, 77, 80, and 83, and then he waited those 16 years, and then we have the second batch of Star Wars movies. And the Star Wars movies, every time they came out, they won the special effects Oscars, every time. And now here is the Matrix, and it kind of seems more like the future. And Star Wars, Phantom Menace, seems kind of old-fashioned, right? Here's George Lucas, and he's doing the same old thing, and here's the Matrix, and they're doing this Alice in Wonderland stuff, and dodging bullets, and computers, and all that kind of thing. It really sort of caught the zeitgeist of the time, and a lot of people were kind of thinking that maybe George Lucas has lost his mojo. So let's talk about bullet time just a little bit very briefly. And so in the way they do bullet time, and what was astounding was that a character, Neo, or I can't remember what one of the other characters, would jump up in the air and then it would freeze. And then the camera would track around them as they were frozen, and then they would action. Then we'd have a kick or something like that. So taken separately, filmmakers have always been able to do that stuff. They've always been able to do tracking shots, and they've always been able to do freeze frames. But how do you do a tracking shot in the middle of a freeze? Okay, it's supposed to be one or the other, not one and the other. How can they do a tracking shot in the middle of a freeze? And this is how they did it. Right here, we have this big green room. These are all still cameras, digital single lens reflexes, DSLRs. And then at one end, there's going to be a film camera, and at the other end, another film camera. There's a film camera there. He's getting ready the film camera right here. These would be all the still cameras. So the film camera would film at a very high frame rate, so you get this real super slow-mo. And then there would be that freeze. And how they got that was all of these cameras, they fire off at the same time. They fire off at the same time. So we are going to see the same scene from a slightly different angle, slightly different angle, slightly different angle, right? Remember, every 24 or so per second, 24 frames per second. So it's going to look like it's frozen. That's it. That's how they do it. It's going to look like it's frozen, but it's just a whole bunch of cameras shooting the same person, Neo, or one of the other characters, at a slightly different angle. Okay, so they're going to blow his coat in the wind and all that big long coat in the wind. The camera's going to track all the way around him because there are whole bunches of cameras. 1, 2, 3, there's cameras all the way around. And then at the end, they can fire off another film camera, and we can all go, wow. We can all go, wow. And that's how they did it. Now, I've linked to the how they did it from the DVD. The guy that explains it is the guy that won the Oscar. He's so cool. He went to get his Oscar with a long coat, just like Neo, and sunglasses and all that. But he's not very good at explaining stuff. He's not very good at explaining stuff. So I usually have to take over and explain how they did it for my class, because and he's got a whole crew. There's a lot of people on the crew, and our guy here, there he is. He keeps saying, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. But it'd be nice. Hey, buddy, how about we? Right? How about we every once in a while instead of I? Okay, anyway, that's my thing. And the Wachowskis, formerly brothers, now sisters, and The Matrix. Now, we have this cool effect, right? This bullet time effect. And I've actually linked to its use a little bit before The Matrix, and it was used in a Gap commercial. And they're dancing big band, Lindy Hop, and the guy throws the girl up in the air, and it freezes, and the camera tracks around, and then down they come, and they're advertising for clothes, Gap clothes, and so on. And that's kind of the way special effects are in a lot of cases. You might see it in a music video or in an advertisement first before it's used anywhere else. And if we go back to morphing, I think before James Cameron it was used in a Michael Jackson video. And I've linked to the video, the Michael Jackson video, where faces are morphing back and forth. And it's really a lot of fun to see that. And then finally, once they sort of have all the bugs worked out, they can put it into a feature film. Same thing with bullet time. It was used in, I think, music video, and there was a fire or something, and a splash of water, and the camera tracks around, and everybody's going, wow, how did they do that? Oh, it's a music video. They do that kind of stuff all the time, not thinking that it was kind of state-of-the-art, cutting-edge stuff. But that was it, right? That was it. That sometimes I see it today, but there was nowhere for bullet time to go. You freeze everything, and then the camera tracks. And sometimes they freeze everything and somebody walks through the shot. But what George Lucas was doing with CGI characters, that is going to lead on a little further. That has more branching off to do. Okay, that there's somewhere for that to go. Whereas the Matrix and bullet time, that was it. This is how you do bullet time, and it hasn't really changed that much since 1999, I don't think, except for instead of film cameras at each end of the arc, they are digital cameras. But otherwise, how they did it hasn't really changed. Whereas lead digital characters, and here also same year, did not win the Oscar. Matrix did. Jar Jar Binks, okay, I get it. I'm not sure I'd want to give Jar Jar Binks an Oscar either, but this is the first lead digital character, and that is kind of a big deal. Okay, not a robot, not a monster, not a dinosaur, but a character with lines and dialogue and all of that. And that's how they did it, right? Nice blue screen, and the actor that did Jar Jar, of course, his eyes are here, and when we see our human actors, Ewan McGregor, you have to be careful because normally we like to look at people in the eye, right? That's what we do. We look in the eye, but Jar Jar's eyes are way up here. So they kind of put this cover over, like a sunglasses or something like that, because the inclination it would be to look him in the neck. And of course, George Lucas didn't want all his live-action actors looking at his Jar Jar Binks character in the neck, so they had to sort of cover it up and look up here, look up here. This is where his eyes are, and all of that. But he was on the set for the actors to look at. They don't just build it in a computer with nothing there. First off, for actors, it's hard to look at nothing. It's almost impossible to look at nothing. Our eyes want to focus on something. So if you try to look right now 3 feet in front of you, just focus on something. It's hovering, some mysterious object is hovering 3 feet in front of you. It's hard to do because there's nothing there. Your eyes are going to want to focus on the back wall or on whatever's back there. You can't just focus on nothingness in space. So normally what they would do is they would get a extension pole and put something bright on there, like a tennis ball, usually a tennis ball because they're real bright, orange or yellow. And then they can move that around. Okay, here's Hulk. He's standing up. He's bending down. Just keep your eyes on the tennis ball, and that's where he will be when we make the movie. And yeah, these are big CGI movies, but the actors, they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look stupid like some of those actors did in the 1950s movies and so on. They want to look okay. Robert Downey Jr. and all these guys, they don't want to be made fun of. So they're trying. Where is he? Where is this character? Where's Ultron? Where's Hulk? What am I looking at? And they really want to get it right. And so a lot of acting is imagining, and stage actors, of course, they're on stage and they have to imagine that there's no audience out there, and they have to imagine that there's a ceiling and whatever and all that. And the same thing goes for actors that are in these CGI movies. They have to imagine that where that blue is, that's a field or stars or a ship or something, right? They have to imagine just like any other actor has to imagine, and they want to get it right. So next up, we have Final Fantasy. It's a feature film based on the video game, and they were going for photoreal humans. Not quite there yet, but boy, you'll see. I mean, the irises and everything, and the eyes and little freckles and stuff. It's even sharper than this. The hair looks pretty good, I think. I think the hair looks fine. The sky, everything looks fine. But there's no way. I think it's Aki Ross is her name. There's no way we would mistake her for a human. If there were a room or a classroom full of students and there was an empty seat and we put her in that empty seat and said, where is the CGI character? Everybody would point it out immediately. Okay, now that's kind of the idea, right? Here's a whole bunch of real humans, and somewhere in there is a CGI creation. Can you find it? And if you are struggling, then they have really done it, right? Then they have made photo real. You can't tell. No way is this photo real. Okay, anyway, check out the couple of the links that we have. I think there's one link or maybe two links for Final Fantasy. And so there are our big budget flops. Final Fantasy's the third one. Lost a ton of money for Sony. Tron and The Abyss. So every CGI movie is not a big moneymaker like a Star Wars movie or Matrix or Jurassic Park, right? They don't all make a lot of money, but these three movies, they did push the technology forward. This is seen from The Abyss, different kinds of aliens there too. But again, I think the audience was kind of confused as to what kind. It's like an hour into the movie before we start seeing aliens. I think by that time everybody's thinking we're going to see some kind of a science versus military nuclear thriller movie, and then all of a sudden we get the aliens. So the second in the films, in Lucas's second trilogy, okay, actually it would be the fifth Star Wars movie that he made. That is the first all digitally shot big budget feature. He shot that $200 million movie with a digital camera in 2002, okay, and that was a big step, a big chance. Everybody was shooting film. Probably 98% of movies were shot on film, and here comes George Lucas shooting it with a digital camera. He talked to the Panasonic people or the Panavision people or Sony or somebody, I can't remember who, and got the specifications and shot it. It was not projected for the most part digitally, so they had to transfer all that digital footage back to film to show in theaters, but it's still a first, right? It's still a first. It's a not some experimental VHS thing, okay, that you might see at a film festival. They've been doing that for a while, but something where you might have a hard time telling, is that digital or is that film? And it was a very big budget, so if it didn't work, then a lot of money would be down the drain, but it did work pretty well. So 2003, The Lord of the Rings, and that's Andy Serkis, S-E-R-K-I-S, I believe, and he is doing motion capture as Gollum, and the link I have for you for motion capture is from Avatar, but this is when motion capture starts coming in the early 2000s, and the aughts, I guess they're called sometimes. And so we've already seen a little bit of Andy Serkis as Gollum with his schizophrenic conversation with himself. Polar Express, 2004. This is Robert Zemeckis, and we've talked about Robert Zemeckis and how good he is, or how much he enjoys working with technology. And he did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and he also did the Back to the Future movies that have some interesting CGI, and Forrest Gump has some very nice technology in it as well. So Zemeckis does a pretty good job of technology, really. I think he handles it quite nicely, and I like his 3D. I really do. He uses it quite nicely. I like the Z-axis, as it's called. And there is Tom Hanks, and he is in his motion capture mocap suit, and he got to play a couple of parts, not just the conductor. He also does the acting for Santa Claus, and there's a sort of a homeless guy, sort of this mystical homeless guy that's also on the train. And for directors shooting movies with a primarily children cast, that can be a rough go. First off, kids are kids, and sometimes they lose concentration and they get a little antsy and that sort of thing. But the other problem is that they're only allowed to be on set for so many hours a day, depending on how old they are. 4-year-olds, probably just an hour or two. And by the time you get to be maybe 8 or 9, 10 years old, maybe 4 or 5 hours per day, maybe 6. But adults, they can push adults to 10, 12, 14 hours a day if they want to. But if you're shooting a movie with lots and lots of kids on the set, it kind of slows you down. Not only are they kids and maybe not remembering their lines and maybe getting a little bit antsy, but just the fact that they're not allowed to be on the set for that long. So this movie has lots and lots of kids in it, but just like regular animation, grown women usually have a voice that can do a young boy. And young girls are easy to do too, but young boys, Bart Simpson is played by, I don't know, I think it's a 50-year-old woman at this point, but that's the way little boys sound, like women, or grown women, I guess. So this is all motion capture, and it's in 3D, and they booked it into IMAX theaters. And that was kind of a big thing way back in 2004. And IMAX theaters had primarily been used for those science documentaries and things like that, something on the space shuttle or flying above the Earth or undersea, and you'd see it at the Museum of Science and Industry or something like that. Maybe you'd take a field trip with your high school class or your grade school class, and that was mostly it for IMAX. Sort of big documentaries, 45-minute documentary, and then that was it. And they wanted to book it into an IMAX theaters, and there were a few in 2004, not too many, not like today. There were a few IMAX theaters around, and they booked it in, and they booked it at the museum theaters, and it made a lot of money at the IMAX theaters. It kind of was a big surprise. It kind of snuck up on a lot of people, this motion capture film that's in 3D, and by the way, it's also playing at IMAX theaters. So there's kind of a double add-on, and I know the studios love that, right? First off, you have to get your glasses, your 3D glasses, and they're going to pretend that those glasses cost a couple of bucks, and then it's in an IMAX theater, and so they can add a couple more bucks on top of your ticket, right? So 3D IMAX movies, I don't know, 18 or 20 bucks sometimes, depending on how far they want to push all that. So that's one of the things I think they like about all that, the upcharge, the upcharge on all the ticket pricing. Okay, around 2004, 2005, we start getting all green screen films, 2 in particular, Sin City, and that's below, and Sky Captain of the World Tomorrow, and I've got links for both of those. Robert Rodriguez does, he started doing 10-minute film school, and then 10-minute flick school, then 15-minute flick school, I think he calls it. And they would appear on the DVDs of his films, El Mariachi and things like that. And then he got involved in green screen and so on. And it's quite informative. He narrates it. He tells how he did it. It's pretty low budget stuff that he was shooting, and he walks you right through it. And I've linked to that. So check that out. It's pretty good. And then I've also linked to Sky Captain of the World of Tomorrow, the trailer, and that was technically the very first the very first virtual backlot or digital backlot film by a few months. It beat out Sin City by a few months. And the director and his brother, but primarily the director, Kerry Conran, he did it all basically in his bedroom, right? He did all the background art and all that, and then shot some actors, not the famous actors that ended up being in the film, but it's sort of a prologue to before we get to our leads, Gwyneth Paltrow and all the leads, and the studio saw it. It's like 5-6 minutes long, and it's gorgeous, just gorgeous. And the studio saw it, and they thought, "Wow, okay, sure, here's enough money. Yeah, go out there and finish it off." So that was, and there are a few instances like that where people do stuff at home and then get Hollywood contract for their little short film. Okay, so fun with all green screen stuff. And Bruce Willis was in Sin City, and he said, "Oh boy, I sure could have used this technology instead of going all the way to Africa and sweating out, in the jungle and mosquitoes and all that kind of stuff. They can have jungle and mosquitoes right there in the that nice air-conditioned studio, okay, and then the actors can go home to their houses or their hotels or whatever every night. You're not actually out there on location." So yeah, he kind of thought that might have saved some angst on his part. So all green screen films, Sin City and Sky Captain of the World Tomorrow. There are some others that you have seen, most likely 300 below, right there. And we have Mirror Mask and The Spirit and The Immortals and The Jungle Book, okay? Not The Lion King. The Lion King is 100% CGI. But The Jungle Book, there was actually a child actor and CGI characters and so on. At the end, in the credits of The Jungle Book, it says filmed on location in Los Angeles, California, which is kind of fun, I think. Okay, and 300, a lot of fun, did very well at the box office. We have the rise of the 3D film, and I mentioned, I think, a little bit earlier, the studios love 3D because, higher ticket prices, and they're harder to pirate. So what's not to love? Now, notice it doesn't have anything to do with the art, and sadly, that's not I don't think that's the chief reason why studios are using 3D. And I was such a big proponent of 3D with Avatar and the Polar Express and so on. And the more I saw, the more I just got really disgusted. These movies, they're just not that good. They're using it, I think, just so they can jack up the ticket prices. And then I started reading more and more about 3D, and I learned that a number of movies were being converted. They were being converted from 2D to 3D. And that's, to me, it looks like a pop-up card. It looks like a pop-up card. You can tell that one actor is closer to you than the other actor, but they didn't seem rounded. It's not supposed to be like a circle. A head is supposed to be like a sphere. The nose is closer and the ears are back. It's supposed to look like a sphere, like a globe. It's not supposed to look flat. And when I saw Tim Burton, and I love Tim Burton, and I saw Alice in Wonderland, and I was just really disappointed in the 3D-ness of Alice in Wonderland, and that's because it was converted. That's because it was converted. I don't know if it was Tim's idea or not, but if you're going to do a real 3D film, you are supposed to have two cameras, or at least two lenses, and that's how we see in 3D. As humans, we have two eyes. They are separated by a few inches, and that parallax there that allows us to see depth very well. We are hunters, just like lions and tigers and wolves. We are hunters. Prey, like rabbits and squirrels, their eyes are kind of on the sides of their head, and they can see lots and lots of motion and things like that, so they can maybe get away. But we hunters, we have the eyes slightly separated like that, and we can see depth really, really well. And unless you're going to emulate that with two cameras and two lenses and all of that, you're not going to quite get that wonderful true 3D. And James Cameron, of course, he is shooting in true 3D. As long as I'm on my 3D rant, I will tell you the best 3D movies I've seen tend to be from the best directors. So, for instance, Martin Scorsese, Hugo, really good 3D movie. I loved it a lot. It's a kid's movie. It's not a Scorsese gangster thing, but it's really, really nicely done. Avatar, of course, is really good. Steven Spielberg did The Adventures of Tintin, quite good in 3D. Matter of fact, I think some of the best 3D tends to be animated movies like Despicable Me or How to Train Your Dragon. They tend to be pretty good because they have so much control and they don't have to worry about the second camera and the second lens and all that. Also, of my favorite 3D movies, Cuarón's Gravity was quite good in 3D out there in space, floating around in space. It was very, very nice. And I also really liked Ang Lee's Life of Pi, and that was in 3D, and I thought that was good too. And those are all really good directors. I don't know that they're all Academy Award-winning directors, but they're all really good directors. And when I see a DC or a Marvel movie in 3D, I'm inevitably disappointed, and I don't do it unless all the other shows are sold out or I can't get in or some such thing. But I really am shying away from 3D. I used to just really seek them out and love it, and 10 years later, unless it's a good director, I tend to stay away from 3D. There are sites that will rate the 3D-ness of the movie. They won't talk about the story or the acting, but they will talk about, does it give you a headache? Is it clear? Is it sharp? Is it too dark? And so on. And so you might check one of those out if you're thinking about seeing a 3D movie. I would imagine when Avatar 2 comes out that you probably would want to seek that out. James Cameron really puts a lot of thought and a lot of effort into 3D. But other than James Cameron and possibly some of those other directors, I would say, for me anyway, I kind of stay away from that. So I also want to talk about low budget. A lot of these movies are big budget movies. Avatar, all these movies are $200, $250, $300 million movies with all the CGI and everything. Getting away from 3D, but big CGI movies. And you can have a really good movie. If it's got a good story, you can have a really good film on a low budget. Robert Rodriguez has proven it, and Neil Blomkamp, a real master of CGI, and a $30 million movie for District 9. Okay, I've linked to the opening scene. It grossed $115 million. That's a pretty good return on the investment. And it looks fantastic. These are not humans in some kind of rubber suit or any exactly, because the dimensions are all wrong, right? So that has to be mo-capped right there. There's also a 5-minute indie film, or 6 or 7-minute indie film called Panic Attack. It's made in Paraguay or Uruguay. I'm not sure, one of the two South American countries. I'm sorry, I can't get the two conflated. And the director, Fede Alvarez, has gotten a Hollywood career out of that. He made this short little thing, spaceships and aliens attacking Earth. The whole thing is maybe 7 minutes long. I've linked to it. Check it out. And he got a career out of all that. Avatar, okay, the big one, 10 years now. We're still waiting, Mr. Cameron, we're still waiting. But this is the film that has a pretty good documentary on mocap. And Cameron, sometimes he calls it performance capture. And I get that because actors don't want to think that they're just stunt doubles, right? That I'm just, you just need my body, okay? You just need me to walk. No, they want to think that they have a distinctive walk and a distinctive way, and otherwise they would just have actors come in and do the body part, and then the stars would come in and do the voice work, right? That'd be the other way to do it. That's how they do the animated films, the Pixar films, and all that is the stars come in and they do the voice work. But no, Cameron is right calling it performance capture, and the actors that resembles their faces and so on. And so I have a pretty good link to a very nice documentary. Again, lots of documentaries, how they did it, and performance capture from Avatar. And like I say, performance capture had been around for 8 or 9 years by that point, but I use Avatar because it has the best documentary with it. So if there's a test question, then that would be the match. So we are trying to reach the holy grail of CGI, photoreal humans, and it is also known as crossing the uncanny valley. And of course, I have a link describing the uncanny valley. The closer a scene gets, the closer a character gets to humans, it looks really, really good, and then it gets kind of creepy. And then if we can cross the uncanny valley, it will look good again. And that is because we are, again, I don't know specifically that it's in our DNA, but when people don't look quite right, okay, if they're way off, then they look funny and robotic and R2D2 or whatever, or some weird monster thing or cute fuzzy thing. But if it's a human and they're trying for a photoreal look for the human and they're not quite there, then they look sick. Their skin isn't right, their eyes aren't right, and throughout human history, that means that maybe they have the plague or the Black Death, or maybe they're zombies, or maybe they're vampires, or who knows what. But we are repulsed by sick-looking humans, right? We're kind of taught that we better stay away or we might catch what they have. And yeah, I mean, this goes back, thousands of years, and so it kind of creeps us out. Whether it's an undead or a Walking Dead or a Frankenstein or coronavirus, right? It doesn't look quite right, and so you either got to get all the way human or pretend that there's some kind of a vampire or something like that. Otherwise, we are not across the uncanny valley, and we are creeped out. So that's Benjamin Button, and some wonderful stuff there on how they did it, and that's for Brad Pitt. A very interesting movie. Benjamin Button is it's a fantasy story, okay, but the only fantasy is that Benjamin Button is born as like an 80-year-old or an 85-year-old. So tiny little baby, kind of wrinkled like babies are, but like an old man. And when he's 5 years old, he looks to be 80. And when he's 10, he looks to be 75 and 70 and 65 and 60 and 55 and 50. He goes through life aging backwards. So they needed Brad Pitt to be able to sort of age backwards as well. Brad Pitt doesn't get to play Benjamin Button until he's somewhere in his maybe 60s and 50s and 40s and 30s, and then they start de-aging him. And Brad, when he made the movie, was in his 40s, and they needed him to be in his teens, and that is one of the very first of the de-aging process that is so popular these days. And so you will see sort of young Brad Pitt and he's a good-looking guy, and he's got good bone structure and all the whole rest of it. But there's no way that 43-year-old Brad Pitt could play 18-year-old Brad Pitt. So we get the aging and we get the de-aging for Benjamin Button. So speaking of de-aging, lots of examples. Most recent, we have Robert De Niro in The Irishman. You can tell, especially if you look like at the neck, things like that, we tend to age a little bit down there. There's a few wrinkles that are a little softened and so on. A little bit right here, softened up a little bit. They used a new process for The Irishman with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci and Al Pacino. They didn't want to have to wear those suits with dots all over their faces, mocap suits. They didn't want them to have to do that. Scorsese didn't want them to do that, and I doubt if they would have done that. So they actually shot it with 3 cameras. I understand there was an infrared camera on each side of the film camera, or the digital camera on each side, and that was part of how they did it. without having them wear the dots and everything all over their faces. So kind of interesting. Here we have Jeff Bridges, the dude from Tron Legacy, and sort of playing against his younger self there. He's doing both parts, but we remember Jeff Bridges from the original Tron from 1982, and then Tron Legacy from, I don't know, 30 years later. There's Robert Downey Jr. from Avengers Endgame. There's Johnny Depp from one of the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Real quick, right? They're not long, lengthy scenes or anything, but a lot of times you want to have a flashback, and you don't want to take your famous 50-year-old actor, and these are good-looking guys, and they've got the look and the jawline and the bone structure and all that wonderful stuff, but there's no way that they can play 20 years old anymore. They're in their 50s. So that's been done a couple of times. Here we have Kurt Russell. And a lot of these people, we know what they look like. We've seen these actors when they've been acting since they were, in some cases, since they were in their teens. So we know what Kurt Russell looked like, right? We know what Will Smith looked like. Fresh Air, Fresh Prince. Okay, so pretty good, huh? Yeah, pretty good, I think. Pretty much like they did. They had a lot to work with. I would pick, if I were picking the very best de-aging, I would pick Blade Runner 2049 and Sean Young. I think they did a fantastic job, and of course I've linked to that. I've got some other links for some of this stuff. You can check out as many of this stuff as you want. But I think the one for Blade Runner 2049 is quite good, and for me that seems to be the peak. You can make your own choice, of course. That's fine. The last stop on our CGI journey is deep fake, and not used so much for movies, but it's technology, and I thought I'd put it in. The whole idea of putting faces for some reason, and the linked video that I have talks about it, and it's really kind of funny. People online, fans, have decided that Nicolas Cage should be like in practically every movie. So they've got him in Lord of the Rings, they've got him in Superman, they've got him in all sorts of movies. I don't know why they picked Nicolas Cage, but there he is. And so we get a problem with deep fake because it's quite good, and there are other technologies, not just actors who can do voices, but if you have enough audio of someone, like possibly a famous actor, or certainly like a president or a premier or a dictator, then there is technology that's separate that can do the voice too. You can do the voice, so they can do the voice of President Obama, and they can do the look, and the technology that an actor can speak the lines, and the Obama character, the deep faked Obama, we hear his voice saying, let's bomb so-and-so, or something like that, right? And so now we're in this really odd position of like, well, I saw it with my own eyes, can I believe it? I saw Putin say that. I saw Trump say that. I saw, whoever, Biden or Hillary, right, with my own eyes. And if we can't believe our own eyes, then what can we believe, right? If you don't see somebody in person. So we don't want to get, I think, where we believe everything we see. And I don't think, on the other hand, we want to not believe anything, right? You can't believe it. They could have faked that. They could have faked this. They could have faked that. Trump could have said this. Trump could have said that. So there has to be a place where you have to find a trusted source. For you, find your trusted source that you saw it on the CNN or the New York Times or the whatever website, and therefore I think I can believe it. Because lots of stuff that can come floating through Facebook and things like that, it's hard to tell. Was it really real or not? Just because I saw them say that, and they've already done slowing it down, slurring the words, making them sound drunk or making them sound old or something like that. So technology is really kind of scary. And like I said, we've got to find a middle part from believing everything or believing nothing, and got to find a believable news source that you can trust. So it's fun, this fun technology for movies. I think at some point we're going to have movies with Marilyn Monroe in them again, or possibly Humphrey Bogart or Clark Gable or Charlie Chaplin, and that's fun and that's exciting and so on. But in the real world, on our news feeds and things like that, that's where things can get really scary, I think, real fast. So let the buyer beware, right? Caveat emptor. So that is a quick and brief history of CGI. I'm sure I left one of your favorites out, but I think that's a pretty good. I've read a number of books and things and watched a number of documentaries. I think I've got a pretty good handle. I think we hit the main parts. That's the real me right there. That is not a deep-faked Professor Dave Eccles for you. And at this point, we only have our third test to take. So I will bid you adieu. Thank you so much for taking this class. And perhaps I will see you in another class in the near future. Thanks again.